Hello, fellow readers and booktubers. This is my quarterly review, the books I read during the third quarter of 2025. I'm not going to go through the books in the order that I read them. I've kind of made little categories for them. And first of all, I want to talk about the mammoths that I read and the mammoth juniors. In BookTube world, we've kind of come up with this. The community has come up with this idea that any book that's 900 pages or longer qualifies as a mammoth. And then somewhere along the line, out of that concept came the concept of the mammoth junior. That's any book between 500 and 900 pages. And of course, these definitions are kind of fluid, but it's fun to think about. So anyway, with that in mind, I did read a mammoth and a couple of junior mammoths during this past quarter. The mammoth was St. Augustine's City of God. I've read other translations of this over the years. This is the Penguin edition translated by Henry Bettenson. It's quite wonderful. It's grand. I return to Augustine over and over again as my personal faith waxes and wanes over time. Augustine is always, I'll always be reading Augustine. His most famous work, of course, is The Confessions. City of God comes in second, I think, his work on the Trinity, and then many, many other works. He was a prolific writer. Whether you're a believer or not, I would always recommend that you dip into Augustine from time to time. This is the mammoth. This is over 1,000 pages, The City of God. I think this is probably his greatest work and his most challenging. It's hard for me to explain my attraction to Augustine. Particularly at this moment in my life, my faith is it's almost out of reach. And yet Augustine, there's something there. It might be connected to the idea that, Augustine was writing as the Roman Empire was imploding. It was collapsing. And he was aware of this too, as most people were. And you get that sense of not so much impending doom, but a sense that things are coming to an end and something different is on the horizon and no one can quite figure out what that is. And so, that kind of lurks between the lines of Augustine's writings. This sense of an enormous change is taking place, whether for good or for ill, no one really knows, or no one knew at the time. Of course, what was happening was the Roman Empire was collapsing and the Middle Ages was about to begin. But before the medieval period truly began, there were a couple of centuries that were pretty dark, the Dark Ages. But Augustine was very attuned to this, and you find this in his writings. And I think perhaps that's one of the things that attracts me to him above and beyond the religious focus that he has. That sense of something's coming, something's happening. And I think that's what things are like for many of us today. We kind of relate to that. And maybe anxiety is too strong of a word, but I find this in Augustine, that unsettled feeling about things. And how he tries to pull it all together, tries to give it focus, and he tries to infuse a feeling of being unsettled with a sense of hope. So anyway, The City of God, St. Augustine, again and again and again. I've read this many, many times, but this was the first time I read this translation. It's really very good. It's the Penguin edition. I strongly recommend it if you're ready for the challenge. Augustine is not an easy read, but he's worth the effort. And then a junior mammoth, Charles Dickens' The Pickwick Papers. I've read a lot of Dickens. I enjoy Dickens very much. I had this on the shelf literally for decades, in fact. And for some reason, I never got around to reading it. It is Charles Dickens' first novel, and the genius is already in full bloom. His ability to characterize, the full characterizations, the way he describes scenes and events, you feel as if you're watching them rather than reading about them. It's already there in this first novel. And but also an incredible sense of humor and a sense of satire, which I don't often associate with Dickens. Dickens could write funny, and he could write satirically, but that's what this book is. There's a lot of humor in it, even laugh-out-loud humor, reading it now, almost 150, almost 200 years later. Yeah, almost 200 years later, wow. But the Pickwick Papers, really enjoyed this. I wish I'd read it earlier. I wish I hadn't put it aside for so long. I might return to it again as early as next year. That's how much I liked it. Although Bleak House and David Copperfield are my true favorites of Dickens and really of all novels of any kind ever, written by whoever. Those are my two favorites. But Pickwick Papers is now in the third slot there, maybe moving up a little bit. And then the complete stories of Flannery O'Connor. These are her complete short stories. She did write novels, but only 2 novels. It's the short story form that she's best known for, and that has won for her a place in the pantheon of great American writers. A well-deserved honor. A brilliant writer, insightful, but very troubling. I think I mentioned this in a previous video, that Flannery O'Connor's short stories are really essentially horror stories, but not like in the Stephen King sense. Stephen King is a literalist. When he writes about zombies and monsters and vampires, he really means zombies, vampires, and monsters. Flannery O'Connor's characters are all real flesh and blood kind of people that you might meet just walking down the street, but they have flaws in them and dark motivations and troubling things in their past, or they may suddenly act in a very troubling kind of way. A lot of criticism directed against Flannery O'Connor is the extreme and unexpected violence in her short stories. A more sympathetic reading is that violence, if you read the short story carefully, you could have seen it coming, or you could sense that something horrible was about to happen. The stories that are most troubling is where you sense something horrible is about to happen and it doesn't happen, but the feeling is still there. When I first started reading, I'd read some Flannery O'Connor before, so I pretty much knew what I was in for. But when I first started reading, I thought this would be a good bedtime right now, read a short story in bed, at bedtime and all that. After a couple of days of this, I had to stop that because these stories were giving me nightmares. I'd never encountered anything like that before in my entire life as a reader, to read a book and it would actually give me nightmares. But these books did, and that's just a nod to O'Connor's incredible talent. So anyway, the complete stories of Flannery O'Connor. That's a Mammoth Jr. Okay. And then here's one I mentioned. I put a whole video up on this one. Dante's Divine Comedy. This is the Folio edition. The translation by Kirkpatrick, I believe. He's very famous in England, as I understand. Yes, the Kirkpatrick translation by Robin Kirkpatrick. Translation is great. Of course, Dante deserves the folio treatment. It's a beautiful edition, nicely done, a nice box set. The only drawback to this is that it is not annotated, which is quite a drawback if you're not familiar with Dante. Now, I've read Dante before in many other translations. The Anthony Esselin translation, I think, is the best in terms of giving you the annotations that you need and the background that you need. So I'd read Dante, I'd read the Divine Comedy many, many times before. And so as I'm reading this one, occasionally I wasn't sure what was being addressed here or who a particular character was. And I would look for the footnotes, but they're not there. So I'd have to pull down another edition. So I would recommend, if you're interested in Dante's Divine Comedy, and I think that you should read it at some point in your life, give it a try. Most people have read the first part, the Inferno, but not as many people are as familiar with the Purgatorio and the Paradiso. But you should really kind of grab it. Don't get this edition, unless you just want a nice book to put on the shelf to show off. You want to read it and get into it and try to understand what this book is all about. You need an edition that's got plenty of citations and footnotes and annotations and all of that. But nonetheless, I'm glad I read it. There's always a place in my heart for Dante. And also, before I read that, I read this book by Joseph Luzzi. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Dante's Divine Comedy, a biography. This is not a biography of Dante. This is a biography of the Divine Comedy. How it was written, when it was written, and then what happened down through the centuries. For a while, the book was on the list of forbidden books. The Catholic Church had put it on that list. And then you kind of trace that development through the centuries until pretty soon it is almost required reading for a Catholic, as I am. But even anyone interested in literature. The point is, this is it's not a very long book. It just traces how Dante's Divine Comedy was embraced or rejected down through the centuries, the different translations and how it was translated. and just how and why it's still with us today, and why it is such a great work of art. And so this is really wonderful. This is interesting to me. I could be wrong in this, but it seems to me that this might be a new genre of literature, to write a biography of a creative work, of a poem, in this case, an epic poem, to treat an author's writing as a living thing, and to write a biography of it. Because after I read this, I then read The Wasteland, a biography of a poem. Now, of course, it's really a biography of T.S. Eliot, but just during that period in his life when he wrote probably the greatest modern poem ever written, The Wasteland. So again, is this a new genre? Writing biographies of works of art as if they were living things, because in a sense they really are. This, by the way, is really great. I strongly recommend it if you're interested in T.S. Eliot and his times, the modernist movement in the early part of the 20th century. All the players are there. Eliot's troubled wife, Ezra Pound, plays a huge part in this. As I think, if you're familiar with Eliot, you would know this. Even Ernest Hemingway makes a brief appearance. It is not a work of fiction, though. It's a biography of T.S. Eliot at a certain point in his life when he was writing The Wasteland. So, the full title is The Wasteland, a biography of a poem. Really enjoyed this a lot. And that went along with reading, of course, The Wasteland and his other poems. You're going to read a biography of a poem, you may as well read the poem. And this coincided with, in August, Thomas at Art and Lit Matters proclaimed August to be the T.S. Eliot month. And on Discord, many of us signed in for this, to take part in the conversation. We did a week on Proof Rock, 2 weeks on The Wasteland, and then a week on the Four Quartets and Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. I really enjoyed that. I was quite overwhelmed and incredibly impressed by the insightful comments of other booktubers who joined in the conversation on Discord. I wasn't able to take part in it as much as I'd hoped to, but I did throw in my 2 cents every now and then. Anyway, this is remarkable, and this is The Wasteland itself, a true work of genius. And I believe the conversation on Discord from T.S. Eliot in August that was directed by Thomas at Art and Lit Matters. That's still up, so you can read everyone's comments. And some of the comments in there are just brilliant. Just brilliant. I was almost intimidated by it. But anyway, so I also read T.S. Eliot. And then I read Doppelganger, Trip into the Mirror World by Naomi Klein. This was a very interesting book. At times, I think she might have lost her focus a little bit. She tried to pull in too much. But it begins with, it's a work of nonfiction. It begins with Naomi Klein, who is a respected journalist. And she realized a few years ago that she was being mistaken for Naomi Wolf, who is also a journalist and was once very respected. But when COVID hit, Naomi Wolf kind of went down the rabbit hole. And suddenly all these weird conspiracy theories and things, she's writing about these stuff. She's showing up on podcasts by these miscreants like Steve Bannon. And of course, she's on the Fox Propaganda Network. Meanwhile, Naomi Klein, who is a serious journalist and a respected journalist, is being mistaken for Wolf. And this was understandably very troubling to her. And in a sense, she saw Wolf as kind of her doppelganger. In fact, physically, they even look alike, or similar anyway. And from that, she kind of delves into this very troubling phenomena of our postmodern age of misinformation being spread in a divided world, an alternate universe kind of a thing. There's reality, and then there is its doppelganger, an unreality that is quickly overtaking reality. It's very interesting reading. I would recommend it. I would only caution that about midway through the book, it seemed to me she kind of lost her focus, but she brings it back and then ties it all together very nicely. Doppelganger by Naomi Klein. And I also read Bart Ehrman's Heaven and Hell, A History of the Afterlife. If you're not familiar with Ehrman, he does a lot of work in New Testament studies, the origins of Christianity. He's a bit of an iconoclast. Well, maybe more than just a bit. He is an iconoclast. He challenges almost all the orthodox views of Christianity and Jesus Christ and concepts of God and these kinds of things. He's a very popularizer of a lot of challenging theological controversies, yeah, we'll go with that. But he writes for a broad audience, and he's very good. And in this book, he explores the concept of heaven and hell by tracing the history of this concept and where it came from and how it developed over time. And he goes all the way back to Mesopotamia, even Egypt, and then through the Israelites, and then, of course, the Greeks and the Romans, ending with Christianity's understanding of these two concepts, and which are really quite bizarre when you think about it. But it's an interesting read. It's very approachable. You know, he's writing for a broad audience, and I would recommend it. This is very good. Then, William Styron. You might recognize the name. He wrote Sophie's Choice, that the movie was based on, and a number of other best-selling novels. I think mostly in the 80s he was known. But this isn't a novel. This is it's called Darkness Visible, a memoir of madness. Styron was struck down with a horrible depression for a time in his life. It kind of came out of nowhere, and it almost destroyed him. And this is really, it's not so much a book, it's just a really long essay, but beautifully written, profoundly troubling. I think everyone deals with a mild depression or the feeling of the blues, or you get sad from time to time. There might be some setback in your personal life or your professional life. But that's not real depression. What he's writing about here is real depression, clinical depression that quite literally almost killed him, and what that experience was like. And so, the two big takeaways I got from this is that, first of all, feeling sad or feeling a little blue is not being depressed. This is about depression. And also the physical manifestation of depression, which is something I had never really thought of before. It's an illness. It's a true illness that affects your mind, but it affects your physical well-being as well in some pretty dramatic and horrible ways. So for those of you who might be having a little trouble in your life, or you're struggling a bit, I would recommend this, Darkness Visible by William Styron. It's a worthwhile read for sure. And then something I just recently put up a video, my thoughts on Stoicism, and it was connected to Seneca's Letters from a Stoic. This is probably I think it's probably the best description of Stoicism or discussion about Stoicism that you can find, because this is, as I said in my previous video, this is Stoicism with heart. It's not that cold, emotionless Stoicism. This is Stoicism in the real world. And Seneca, who was very much a part of the political scene of his time, which was quite chaotic, he kind of captures the feeling of Stoicism, what it is, and how can it be applied in real life circumstances. A wonderful thing. And this translation in particular, this is by Robin Campbell. It's the Penguin edition. I'd recommend this one. And I'm planning an upcoming trip with my family to England and Scotland. A good friend of mine, whose daughter graduated from Oxford and opted to stay in London to live there. Can't blame her. Anyway, he and his wife get to visit their daughter on a regular basis. And when I told him that I was going to be leaving for London soon, he loaned me this book, The Great Pubs of London. In some respects, it's kind of a coffee table book. The photography in this is really very good, but the text it's a lot of fun to read, and it's very interesting. I took a lot of notes. There are certain pubs I'm definitely going to look for, and it seems like a lot of the pubs in London are haunted, so there's that. But anyway, this is a fun book to read. And I also read Barbara Levick's Biography of Claudius. For those of you who have been wondering, am I still doing the my reading challenge of the Roman emperors? Yes, I am. I'm very delinquent on this. It takes a while for me to get all the stuff together. But the next emperor I'm going to be doing is Nero. Be watching for that. It'll be coming up in the next couple of weeks. But anyway, this was Claudius, the biography of Claudius. It's very, very good. And this is what I based my video on for my Roman Emperor reading challenge when I did my video on Claudius. This is the Roman Emperor. He's the main character in Robert Graves' famous historical novels, I, Claudius and Claudius the God. But this is the real Claudius. It's a little bit different from Graves' kind of romanticized version of Claudius. Good stuff, though. Good historian. And then, what would the year be without some Shakespeare? I read Katherine Duncan-Jones, Shakespeare, An Ungentle Life. This was an interesting approach to Shakespeare. It was an attempt to kind of demystify Shakespeare. As I'm sure many of you know, our understanding of Shakespeare's life is pretty sketchy, but not completely unknown. It is possible to reconstruct some things. There's been a lot of conjecture over the years based on some pretty solid evidence that you can find in his plays and in his sonnets. But what Duncan-Jones did in this biography, she placed the emphasis not so much on the plays, but on what Shakespeare's life might have actually been like. And you can reconstruct that. There are some legal documents, the transference of some property, and of course his will, birth certificates, baptisms, things like this. And so she's looking at Shakespeare, kind of stripping away the myth of Shakespeare to try to get to the real guy. Is she successful in this? Yeah, kind of. It was very interesting. I really enjoyed it. Of course, there is a great deal in here about the plays. You can't write about Shakespeare without mentioning the plays, but she just, kind of traces how these plays emerged and why they emerged at the time that they did, and how many of them have to do with that huge political event, that huge dynastic event that occurred in Shakespeare's time, the end of the Tudor monarchy and the beginning of the Stuart monarchy, and Shakespeare was kind of in the thick of that. So she's just kind of exploring Shakespeare's life without the emphasis being on the plays, but more on his life and his struggles. I enjoyed this a lot. And of course, once you read about the life of Shakespeare, got to read a little Shakespeare. So Richard II. I've read all these before. I've read all of Shakespeare. I'm so proud of that. I dipped into some that I've only read a few times. Richard II is really good. Twelfth Night, there's one of his comedies. And Macbeth. Seems to be that time of year to be reading Macbeth. I think Macbeth is everyone's favorite, and I don't think it's just because it's his shortest play. The power of this play is sometimes kind of overwhelming. It's spooky and scary. It's got witches and all that business, but also it really plumbs the depths of human despair and even human cruelty. However, before I read Macbeth, though, I pulled down from the shelf Harold Bloom's essay, Macbeth, A Dagger of the Mind. I said it was an essay. It's a book. This was part of a series that Bloom wrote. Let's see, the title of the series was Shakespeare's Personalities. There are 5 books in the series, one on Macbeth, one on Lear, one on Iago, one on Falstaff. Who am I leaving out? Oh, and Macbeth. Did I get them all? Yeah. Oh, and Cleopatra. That's the other one. And Harold Bloom was and remains now, even after his death, a very controversial literary critic, Shakespeare scholar. He's not the most approachable writer, but he's worth the effort. And this essay he wrote, this little book he wrote, is kind of an introduction to Macbeth, is well worth the time. I had read it before, so I thought I'd give it another run. And I did. I'm glad I did. And then I went to Macbeth. So those are my books for the third quarter of 2025. And that's what I've got for you today. Keep reading and stay strong. That's it.